Hi, and welcome back to the Eras of. We are so glad you are here with us. I am Pastor Megan.
And I'm Pastor Paige, and we are in the Speak Now era, which is so exciting. This is an album we both were really excited about when it came out in the Taylor's version.
Yes, it's so good. It's one of my favorites. It was one of my favorites pre-Taylor's version, and it is still one of my favorites post-Taylor's version.
It's a lot country for me, so but some of the music is some of the stuff that I love. It gets stuck in my head. It shows off her ability to write so well, right? So this one, the color is purple.
If you're watching, you can tell that.
You can tell that. The years are 2010 to 2012. Mm-hmm. This album followed Fearless, which was one of the most awarded country albums or something. But a lot of people questioned her writing. Yeah. So she fully committed with this album to writing by herself. There are no co-writers on this album.
Yeah.
And it's confessional. All of them are. But it's also got a little bit of clapback.
It does. And I think that's something she's speaking about with the co-writers is something she's struggled with her whole entire career of people wondering how she writes all of this music and how can she just do it on her own.
Right. And that's the poet piece, right? Like we talked about in the Tortured Poets Department extra bonus episode, and I'm sure we will when we get the album.
Yes.
But her poetic voice, right? Her ability to write is why we can call out these lines and these songs and tie them to psalms and to stories in scripture. So speaking of pulling out, verses and lines, one of the things we're doing this year is we're looking for a line on the album that describes our understanding of God or our relationship with God.
Yes.
So what's yours? Let's start with yours.
So I was really trying to not pick the same song that was my song from the Jesus era.
Okay.
It didn't work. I tried really hard. There was another song that I thought I maybe could have, but the more I thought of it, and we've had this conversation multiple times now on the podcast, that I'm trying not to think of my relationship with God when these albums came out.
Right.
If that's what we were doing, I would have had the other song.
Okay.
Because 2010, 2011, 2012... Megan was trying to figure out who she was. And faith was not a huge part of that. Yeah. So there was a song that I was very much like, yeah. But then I was like, no, you're thinking about your relationship with God right now.
Yeah.
So then the song that was my song from last season came up on the shuffle. And I went, yeah.
There it is.
There it is. So if you remember from last season, that song is Enchanted. But I believe it is a different line.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that because I did not go back and check.
Okay.
But I do know it was Enchanted. Right. And I thought of it more as every time I meet God in a new place, in a new way. I have been very blessed to travel in ministry, not just to new appointments, but to travel to Cambodia and Vietnam and Africa and Israel. And I found God in new and exciting places.
Yeah.
And in exciting ways. So really the line, I was enchanted to meet you. All I can say is I was enchanted to meet you. And I'm like, yeah, every time I discover God in a new way, I'm like, oh, that's what this is.
Right.
This is why this feels so good and like home. And it's the warm and fuzzy and cozy and peace.
Right.
So it was definitely I know God is enchanted to meet me every time I rediscover that part of myself. I was enchanted to discover God again in that way. So enchanted, who knows when we get to the next several times if that's still going to be the song, but at least for the first 2 seasons, it's Enchanted.
Well, this song, I mean, Enchanted gets stuck in my head. So every time we do this album, it's just Enchanted repeating in my head, which, I mean, look, there are worse songs.
Exactly.
To repeat.
There are.
Yeah. Well, and, I was listening to And when I came to the one I picked last time, which was innocent, I was also really intentional. Like, I don't want it to be innocent.
Yeah.
For either of the verses that, we'll talk about. So mine actually really surprised me.
Yeah. When I saw it, I was like, oh,
what an
okay,
interesting.
Paige.
So I think
I was like, can't wait to hear this story.
Well, there are several songs of Taylor's that she tells a story. And when she comes to the end of the story, Love Story does this to me too. I start to tear up, and I cannot explain why, but there's something about that ending. It's the part of me that watches Hallmark movies, right?
Yes.
And loves a good love story.
Yeah.
And so when I was listening to mine, and I'm going to refer to lyrics because my brain is a little fuzzy right now.
Yeah.
It's at the end of that song where she says, that she thought he was going to say goodbye. And she said, I braced myself for the goodbye because it's all I've ever known. And you took me by surprise. You said, I'll never leave you alone. I mean, just reading it, I'm tearing up a little. There's something about that sense of people are going to leave you. That if you've ever felt that way, if you're an, avoidant attachment type or an anxious attachment type, I think is the one that like, you just think people are going to leave. Then there's something about realizing that God will never leave you alone.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you think you've fallen so far that God doesn't matter.
Yeah, and God's still going to be there.
I'll never leave you alone. So that was the one for me. And again, it surprised me.
Yeah.
As it came to me. But
I think that's what's been really fun so far with this question is the way that God has surprised us in finding those lyrics.
Right.
And I think that says so much about our faith and the way God shows up for us, that it's just so surprising sometimes how they just go, well, guess what? I'm still here. Or thank you for meeting me here at this spot again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that I'll be there with you in unexpected ways and unexpected places, which is kind of where we both found ourselves with this one. So
yes. And I think that leads really well into our stories for this era.
Yeah.
But before we start where we want to start, we have to rewind a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, and this is something Paige and I, when we were talking before we started recording, we know there are going to be songs that are going to
call us back to previous
stories that we've talked about, because the songs that we've then heard on that album are just like, oh, there's that story. There's, that thing that we were talking about. And we found several songs and even some stuff that we didn't even talk about in previous episodes that were just like, oh, look, Taylor wrote a song about this. Or let me try and convince you, Paige, why I think this song is about this situation.
Well, and I want to talk briefly about why this matters, right?
It is. Why it does.
Want to be intentional about how we tell the story. And one of the things that really bugs me, and I'll own this, like this is a personal irritation, is how often we take the story of God's people and we just mix it all up and forget that it has an order and the order matters, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that some of these things occur before the main story that we're going to be talking about today, which, by the way, I'm so excited because this was like the perfect album for this part of the story, it helps us to remember, okay, well, this happened before. So we have some things that happen in an order. And friends who are watching, you may have watched Megan's face because I started to move things in our digital notes. And I'm going to talk about this one first.
Okay.
Because this is one that always gets put out of order.
Yes.
We don't think about when it happened.
Yes. And I didn't, as you've all heard probably in our very first intro episode, I am not as well versed in the Old Testament as Paige is. And so when I thought of this story, I could not for the life of me remember where it happened. Because like Paige just said, it gets put everywhere.
Right.
It gets put at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, in the middle of other things. So it was just a look of, but I thought we were talking about this at another point.
Right.
Not that I, so.
Well, and I moved it because it happens before and we were talking about the order.
Yes.
So this story is one that I think is familiar to people who don't read the Bible, who aren't like Jesus people. And it's the story of the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
Where the people build this tower so tall that they're trying to reach God.
Mm-hmm.
And God's response is, oh no, they're getting too close. Let's make it hard for them to communicate, and divides us by language. And this happens in Genesis.
Once it's over. Nope, you have all of them?
I have all of
them.
them.
We're looking at the liner notes, folks. So it's castles crumbling. And
by the way, when I saw that note, I was like, ooh, I'm on board with this.
Yes. So basically the whole entire song, really. Once I had an empire and a golden age, I was held up so high, I used to be great. They used to cheer when they saw my face. Now I fear I have fallen from grace, and I feel like my castle's crumbling down, and I watch all my bridges burn to the ground, and you don't want to know me. I will just let you down. You don't want to know me now. Once I was the great hope for a dynasty. Crowds would hang on my words, and they trusted me. Their faith was strong, but I pushed it too far. And I mean, I could read you the whole song, because to me, as I was listening to this, I was like, oh, like it's Tower of Babel, but I could feel like it could fit so many different things.
Yeah, I had a different thought for it. And maybe we'll bring it up later.
Yes. But, you hear the story of the Tower of Babel, that they built this huge tower to try and get close to God, like you said. And then God said, we're now going to make it really hard for you guys to communicate.
Right.
And so it's like their faith was strong, so they wanted to build this tower. And then, well, actually, no, it's going to tear you down.
Right.
They used to chant my name. Now they're screaming that they hate me. They never wanted you to hate me. Like,
that's such a powerful vault track on this album.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did. I thought I think that's a great tie.
Thank you. As soon as I heard that first couple lines, I was like, oh, like there are some songs that when we hear them, I think we both instantly are like, that's the song.
And
or that's the story. That's the story.
And sometimes we have the same thoughts and sometimes we have different thoughts.
Yes. There may be a time where I was going in to put something in and I saw you had already written it down and I was like, okay. But at least we were on the same wavelength for what we were thinking.
Yeah.
So sometimes we will still add the note, but other times it's like, no, we'll give it to that person.
Right. Well, right. So I knew that you had, anyway, we'll get to those.
Yes.
So after Noah, after the Tower of Babel, we introduced you guys to Abraham.
Yes.
And you've got a song for Abraham from this album.
Yeah, I do. And this is just like how we had Change for Fearless. Just get ready to hear a lot about Long Live.
Yeah.
Because it's all over the place. And for me, Abraham, more so the fact of what God told him, not for Abraham specifically.
Right.
Just that your descendants will outnumber the stars. They will, outlive you. They are us. They are you.
Right.
So long live.
Right.
Long live all the things that we've gone through, everything. Long live as Abraham. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And then we introduced you to a man named Jacob, who is a descendant of Abraham.
Yes.
And we talked a little bit about this experience of Jacob and when his name changed. So you want to tell that story and then tell us what song you got?
So Jacob was wrestling with God and just would not let go and not let God let go of him. And God was like, well, okay, let's have some fun with this. I think sometimes God in the Old Testament was like, oh, you want to try me?
Right.
Let me show you. Now you walk with a limp for the rest of your life.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, your name's now Israel.
Right. Because Israel means wrestling with God.
Yes.
So what song did you put there?
So I put Better Than Revenge.
Okay.
And I know.
You got to convince
me.
The
look on your face is like, yeah, sure. Because Paige last time said that she is really trying to find a song for Jacob wrestling with God.
Yeah.
And to me, not so much the context. This is again where I went with the title, not the context of the song.
Fair enough.
Is God going, okay, better than revenge? I'll go ahead and hurt you and, make you limp and change your name and make you just completely different. So instead of like doing something else, he's like, let's do this instead.
Right.
So that was my sort of like, this is the very basic of how it fits. But you did also mention there might be a song later on that fits him better. But that was my first,
I like it. And I love this. That's such a good story. Such an important story because it reminds us that it's okay to wrestle with God and wrestle with our faith. And
and I think that's what also Better Than Revenge tells us is sort of, you think you got me by cheating on me, by hurting me, whatever. But guess what?
There's nothing I do
there's
better.
There's nothing better than revenge. There's nothing better than showing you how great I am.
Right.
By being your creator.
Right.
By being the one who can physically change you.
Right.
To show you that I am stronger than you, know more than you, know how this is going to impact everyone in the future.
Yeah.
So to me, that was like the Better Than Revenge. Not like in a bad way, but in like a, let's see what kind of lesson you can learn from this.
Right. Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
So I think that's a good tie. And
yes.
We also began last week to introduce you all to a man named Moses.
Yes.
And that's this album with the Moses story and with the part of the story of Moses that we're in. I mean, I kept going, oh, that's this, and oh, that's this, and I'm tying a bunch of things. And this is a story that is like the central story of the Jewish faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is one of their most important narratives. It defines who they are. We'll talk a little bit about that as we continue. But it means that Moses is Superman.
Yes. Yes, he is.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't need much more explaining, in my opinion. Moses is just Superman.
Yeah.
And Moses has an experience that we both thought of for the same song. But you love this story. I'm going to let you tell it.
I do, because, and as I mentioned last week, there was a song that I had claimed. It's not this song.
It's not this song.
It's not this song, which means we get to revisit Moses another time.
Right.
But like we had said earlier, we're going to keep revisiting some of these characters and some of these stories throughout this whole season, and you're going to get to really know them really well. So this one, the story of Moses, when he is first called, he is walking with his father-in-law's sheep, taking them out like he was normally supposed to do. And all of a sudden, he hears his name and this call coming from somewhere. And he's not really sure where it is at first. And he's like, okay, who's calling my name? I'm out here by myself. I got a bunch of sheep. Have I been with the sheep too long that they're now starting to talk to me? If only it was just the sheep talking to him. But then all of a sudden, he sees in the distance a bush. But that bush is burning.
And not being consumed.
And not being consumed by the flames. Which is a whole nother thing in itself. But it's such a beautiful moment of God calling Moses in a very unlikely way, but in a place that Moses always was.
Yeah. So this is a regular bush that
this is just a regular bush that he's seen all the time, a place that he's walked past all the time. But now this bush is extraordinary. We've talked a lot about in the first season and here as well that there are call stories and call moments in the Bible that we identify with as pastors.
Right.
Paige and I have a similar one in later on, but that resonates with you much more.
Yeah.
From where you were called and everything. Moses in the burning bush is me.
You needed to be a little smacked upside the head, fire in your face kind of thing to hear what God was saying.
I needed God to call me in the place that I was all the time.
Ah, all right.
So it is Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday, I'd say probably 12 years ago now.
Wow.
It was Ash Wednesday. I was sitting in the pew in my choir loft at my home church, and God said, this is where you're supposed to be.
Wow.
I had sat in that pew multiple times, but that day it was that extraordinary moment, like Moses had with the burning bush. And Moses goes on, to say, God, are you sure you mean me? We talked a little bit about that last time. Are you sure you mean me? I don't have a good speaking voice. I'm not that good. And God goes, remove your sandals. You're standing on holy ground. For you are who I'm calling. And it's just beautiful. So the song I thought of as soon as we heard it was Sparks Fly.
Yep.
And the two lines, and I don't often pull the lines for the songs, but this one I knew I needed to. Especially speaking of Moses standing in front of this burning bush. And I stood there and you stood there in front of me, just close enough to touch, close enough to hope you couldn't see what I was thinking of. And that is Moses standing in front of the bush.
Right.
He's close enough to see what's going on, but not close enough to see how everything's going to change. And then the next part of it was, my mind forgets to remind me you're a bad idea. You touch me once and it's really something. You find I'm even better than you imagined I would be. I'm on my guard for the rest of the world, but with you, I know it's no good. And I could wait patiently, but I really wish you would. Drop everything now. Meet me in the pouring rain.
Right.
All of it. And to me, this song, as well as another song that we will get to in just a few short weeks,
right,
is so Moses in that moment, and God just being like, but you don't understand. There is so much to you.
And so much I need you to do.
Yes. Like, you have so much to give to this world. Like, just let me use you. It's going to be even better than you imagined.
Right.
Like, this to me is so Moses. Yeah.
And I mean, I agree. I put the same note, right?
Yes.
And not with as much detail, but for me, it was drop everything now. Right?
Yeah.
Like, just drop everything you're doing.
Yeah.
Because I got work for you. And it's the work that I think is going to, for me, takes up so many songs in this album. The work that Moses is called to do, right?
Yeah.
So we introduced you a little bit to Moses' story and the situation of the people, the Israelites, while they're in Egypt. And they have become enslaved, and it's not good. Slavery is never good, frankly. And it's time for the Israelites to be freed from this captivity.
Let my people go.
Right. Moses is the one who God appoints to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. Right.
Yep.
And Moses is that person because Moses had a prior relationship with Pharaoh. I don't have a song for this.
No.
But y'all need to know this. Like, he was found in the Nile because all of the baby boys of the Israelites were supposed to have been killed by drowning. Couple of midwives save him. He is found by the Pharaoh's daughter, and she takes him and basically raises him as her own. And so then he's raised as the Pharaoh's grandson, right? And at the same time, this relationship with the Pharaoh evolves over time, and the Pharaoh becomes awfully mean.
Yeah.
Right. That's that song mean. I mean, as both you had the same thought, right?
Yes.
Like,
I was going in to add it to my notes, and Paige was in there adding it at that moment. I was like, okay, we're at least on the same wavelength for this song.
We got it.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. So Moses goes to the Pharaoh and says, let my people go. Pharaoh's like, no.
Yeah.
And God's response is, there's nothing I do better than revenge.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was looking at these earlier, the plagues.
Yeah.
There are 7 plagues that they go through. And one of them is locusts, which makes me think about a moth to the flame, and she was holding the matches, right? In the rewrite, the new line in that. And all of this time, his heart keeps getting hardened, right? And that's also where mean comes in for me, where she's like, someone made you cold.
Yes.
Right. And so that was the other tie to Pharaoh for me. So finally they leave.
They do. Finally.
But they leave in the dead of night. And so I thought about the end of Speak Now.
Yes.
Where I'll meet you when I'm out of my tux at the back door.
Yes.
Like, oh, he sneaks. She visualizes him sneaking out of the wedding.
Yes. It's an imagination,
right? She daydreams him sneaking out of the wedding. But at the same time, the Israelites, they leave in the dead of night.
Yeah.
And have to leave, and their bread doesn't get to rise. And so
that's how we get manna.
Matzah, unleavened bread. Well, did you know that the Israelites are told to have a regular festival of unleavened bread? Yeah. So in Exodus 13, they're given instructions about how often they're supposed to celebrate this to remember that they had been in captivity. And so I thought about long live.
Yes.
Again, like remember the story.
Yeah.
Remember what we've done.
Yes.
And throughout scripture, there are moments where we're commanded, and particularly the Israelites are commanded to do things, to remember and acknowledge the ways God has been in their world.
Yeah.
So I put that one there, and I've got a bunch, so I'm going through them really fast.
Yes.
Friends. When I heard haunted,
okay,
I thought about how Pharaoh must have felt when they actually left.
Yes.
Like
before he started chasing them.
Because he's haunted, right? He's haunted by the plagues, which did lasting damage to that part of the world. And they cross through the Reed Sea or the Red Sea, but it's the Reed Sea. And I thought about ours.
Okay.
The water's high, I think is the line. Or the water's rough.
Yes.
The water's rough, right?
Yeah.
But there was something about that made me think about them making it through the Reed Sea because, right, the Israelites make it through. The waters close over top of Pharaoh's army, which is a little like...
better than revenge?
It's a lot better than revenge, right? Really, there's nothing God does better than revenge.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like that's God's song for all of the Old Testament.
Right? I know. I almost picked a part of it as my God verse for this era. I didn't. I ended up going somewhere else.
Yes. Both of us did.
Right. But then they get through and they're in the desert. And we talked about this last time a fair amount about how they can't be this new people.
Yes. They don't know how to. They're stuck in their old ways.
Right. And so for me, there were two songs that made me think of this.
Okay.
One is Innocent, which was my song last time. Around this idea of you're not who you once were and you're not what you once did. And they have to learn a new way of life outside of captivity as free people. And I thought about Last Kiss.
Ooh.
Because there are a couple of times in scripture where they're like, Moses, why did you leave? Why did you bring us into the desert where we would be killed? Sure, we were enslaved, but at least we had food.
And we were alive.
And why did you bring us out here? So we wouldn't have water. I mean, I thought about in Last Kiss, she talks about being in his clothes. Yeah. Sitting in the, on the floor. And I was like, oh, yeah. That's like longing for that other thing.
That thing that you didn't realize was going to end.
You didn't realize it was going to end, and then it was worth it. Your hindsight is 2020 and rose-colored glasses, right?
Yes, like they very much had the rose-colored glasses on and just Last Kiss is perfect for that. Yeah, I like that.
So I know that was really fast to go through,
but it's because Taylor just gave us so many songs,
right? Yeah,
and then we also have a couple that
are fast forwards, right?
Yes, because sometimes there'll be songs that we haven't touched yet and aren't there for a while.
Right.
And we don't want to wait.
Right.
So and those were yours. So what are those?
So these are sort of like, they're stories that will come later. And the one is in the book of, now I should have looked it up. I think it's Ezekiel.
It is Ezekiel.
Ezekiel, where God challenges Ezekiel to raise, or gives Ezekiel what he needs to raise up a valley of dry bones. And so I thought of electric touch. Think about your electric touch will bring me back to life. That's what it is. And your electric touch will bring me back to life, right? Ezekiel has the words to bring these dry bones back to life. So that one I tied to. And before we get to our actual psalm.
Yes. And our other things that we still have to do.
Right.
We have a fun psalm.
Well,
the other one's not a fun psalm.
We'll call it a bonus psalm because we didn't want to end here.
Mm-hmm.
I love the Psalms.
Yes.
I shared this in an earlier episode that one year for Lent, I read through the Psalms. Mm-hmm. And I've never been able to find this list again that I used. But it led me to some Psalms I'd never read before. And it led me to read a couple of Psalms. One of them I did know. But that are awful. They're vengeance
Not
Psalms.
Awful like written wise, just awful in
the content,
the topic.
And the content, right, is mean. And so mean also could work here, but not really. I think it really is. They're Psalms of vengeance. That's the category. Mm-hmm. I love the Psalms because everything that we feel today is there, right? So for Better Than Revenge, I wanted to share with you all a part of one of my favorite Psalms, and I'm going to try to get to it quickly. It's Psalm 58, and Psalm 58 is one that I discovered as a part of this reading through.
Yeah.
Partially because it is a really particularly funny line. It does. The problem is the first half of the line is particularly funny, and the second half is heart-wrenching.
That's kind of life, though.
Isn't it, though?
Yeah.
So I'm going to start in the middle. So we'll start at the second half of 3. They err from their birth, speaking lies. They have venom like the venom of a serpent, like the deaf adder that stops its ear, so that it does not hear the voice of charmers or the cunning enchanter. O God, break the teeth in their mouths. Tear out the fangs of the young lion, O Lord. Let them vanish like water that runs away. Like grass, let them be trodden down and wither. Let them be like the snail that dissolves into slime.
Wow.
And I'm not going to read the second half of that line. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason I'm not going to read it is that it refers to pregnancy loss. And I know so many people who've been hurt by that and struggled with it. But the power of that language, especially when you think about Better Than Revenge and the original lyric, that line about she's better known for her work on the mattress was vicious.
Uh-huh.
Right?
And we didn't talk much about that the first time around.
We didn't. We talked about her changing the line.
Yes. But not how terrible that first line was.
Terrible. And there's another psalm, Psalm 137. And it was written after the Israelites were like taken out of they've left, they've come back home, and now they've have to leave again. Mm-hmm. And it has one line. I'm just going to read the one line. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock.
Yeah. Yeah.
This particular psalm is one, again, it was written, the Israelites have come, Moses has happened. Mm-hmm. They've done all of this.
Yeah.
There's judges and kings, and we'll talk about all of that coming up. Mm-hmm. And then the kingdom is divided. Half of them are become occupied. The other half stay free. But then another group comes in, occupies them, and tears them from their homeland. Mm-hmm. That's who this is about.
Yeah.
And it is the psalmic version of she's better known for her work on the mattress.
Yeah.
And we can't change it. My hope is that because it was written down, nobody actually did it.
Yeah.
I mean, having been to Cambodia and knowing what was done there, maybe someday we'll tell you guys a little bit more about that history. But this is why we couldn't end with this psalm.
No.
Right? It's heavy.
It is. And yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we go to something more uplifting?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
why don't we talk about our speak now verses that to describe God or the people or this particular time in their speak now era. So
Yeah.
Paige, why don't you kick us off with that?
So actually this kind of is a perfect transition from all of that, right? I went to Electric Touch and I love
such a good song.
That's one of my favorites. But part of what I love about it is this idea that as you enter into this new thing, you just have no faith that it's going to be okay. And so the line for me was, I've got my money on things going badly. Got a history of stories ending sadly. The God's story in the Old Testament continually ends sadly.
Yeah.
Right? Like as I gave you a quick overview, right? They're in captivity, they leave, they come back, they do all these things to get their land and blah blah blah, and then their kingdom is divided, and then people are occupied, and they're taken from their homeland. It's not a happy story.
It's not.
And
it hasn't been really ever.
Right. No. And so that was the line that I thought of. I suspect yours was a little more, wasn't necessarily more positive.
No.
As I just looked at our notes.
Yeah. It's really interesting because as we've said multiple times, we don't often talk about what we've picked until we see each other the day we record. And I knew what this part of, I was about to say the gospel, but no, this part of the Old Testament was going to focus on a lot of the stories that made this group of people who they were and will show us and showed us what they had to go through.
Right.
And all the trials and tribulations and everything that was placed in front of them. This song, you had trouble on Fearless trying to figure out your song for this era. This was me. This was this morning, me finally figuring out. And I think the only reason why I figured it out is I normally listen to the album straight through. I hit it on shuffle mode this morning.
Okay.
So I wasn't expecting what song was coming next.
That's great.
So it sort of helped me to sort of open mind and not go, oh, well, Long Live's coming up next. Or, it's track 5 time. It was, so you sort of heard the songs in new ways, which was good.
Yeah.
So I did the Story of Us. And after all the things we've talked about, this is very interesting. That this is what I picked. And then the lines that I picked.
Right. I know.
After you reading our first 2 Psalms for us. So the lines are, and the story of us looks a lot like a tragedy now. This is looking like a contest of who can act like they care less. But I liked it better when you were on my side. The battle's in your hands now, but I would lay my armor down.
I almost picked that. This story of us looks a lot like a tragedy now. I really did.
Yeah.
Because look,
God is. That's what the Old Testament is, and especially this part right here. It's all this tragedy and all this, contest. That was quotations around contest for those of you not listening or watching. Between Moses and the Israelites of I'm going to go chill out on this mountain now. Well, now we're going to melt all of our gold down and make a calf. Well, now I'm going to go do this. And it's sort of like they were, testing each other and competing with each other of who's going to be the one that's going to come out on top of what they're all doing, and it's, well, the battle's in your hands now.
Well, and it's interesting too, because part of what God is doing and what the people who put these stories together are doing is trying to prove that Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, the God of Abraham, the God of Sarah, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, is better than the God of Babylon or the God of Rome or Greeks or whatever.
Yes.
All of these people who once at one point controlled this area. And so it in ways like it is a contest, right? Like
of who's going to come out on top.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, the whole story of Us song is like the next chapter. And it's just like, yes, this part of the book, it's definitely the next chapter, please.
So the other part, I think this was the one, there's a piece at the end where thinking about, I don't hear you're not, and we're not speaking.
Mm-hmm.
That as another jump ahead.
Yeah.
After there's a period of time that's called the intertestamental period that is like 500 years between the last book of the Old Testament and the first book of the Gospels, where they're like, where's God?
Yeah.
Are you even speaking to us? Now, that's a very Christian perspective.
Yes.
There is there's Jewish content that was produced in that time that for us, for Christians, and even I think for the Jews, didn't rise to the level of scripture. The Talmud and the rabbinic works all are relevant and would have, covered not just the intertestamental period, but like still
everything.
Yeah. So I thought about that too. Like,
yes.
And we're not speaking now.
Yes. Well, and then you're usually the one good for figuring out our track 5 story. So do you have a track 5 story for Dear John?
I mean, look, this is the revenge album. This is the, like, you hurt me, I'm going to write a song about it album, right?
Yes.
So it's the plagues.
Ooh, yes.
It's the plagues.
Dear John is the plagues.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, better than revenge really is.
But this could be like the lesser plagues.
Well, right. I mean, God basically being like, well, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, Pharaoh. Yeah. Because you won't let my people go. Right? Like,
yes.
So it's that conflict between Moses and God, and with Moses and God against Pharaoh. Mm-hmm. To me, is Dear John.
Yeah. Yeah. That Dear John just sort of perplexed me. And I was just like, that song always perplexes me, but even more so with trying to figure out what story was going to go with that. So I'm glad you will always take that one for the team.
Well, and we'll never cover every song on every, right? Like,
yes.
On any album. So, hopefully we'll come back. Maybe there's something more clear for Dear John in a future season. Yes. I don't know, but yeah. Dear John is a tough one, I think, because it's so vulnerable, and we know there's truth to it.
Yes.
In a way that we don't have with others.
Yeah.
So,
which will make, I think, our next album even more interesting, because we know there's a lot of truth and factual stories behind those. So we're going to have to remove those stories as we're listening to what's next, Paige.
Yeah, we get to go to Red. Yes. We get to go to the first not country album. I should not be this excited. But
it's also like our longest one too.
Red is a long album, and I've already got some plans. I've already got some things that I'm tying, which I'm excited about.
Yes.
But the Red, I think, will be fun. We're going to continue to tell you the story. And like we said, when we've got things that are out of timeline from where we are, we'll let you know. And if we jump ahead in the timeline, so I don't really know where we're going to go as we listen to Red.
Yeah.
But right now where the story is, the Israelites are wandering in the desert.
Yes, for 40 years.
For 40 years. So
that might be several eras.
Right. That's true.
Let's hope not.
Right. No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's already been 2. Because we hit it in Fearless too.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
So hopefully for Red, we'll get our way into the promised land. At least some people will.
Some of them will. Yeah. Yeah.
So what are they gonna see from us in the week 2 weeks ahead before the next episode?
It might be a Sunday question, it might be a midweek question, but there'll be something posted in between the weeks of this post or this podcast and Red podcast. So you'll get, have your questions like always of what was your Speak Now story that we missed or that you were like, oh, why didn't they include that one? Wouldn't that have fit Never Grow Up or I Can See You? Those are just the songs I can see real quickly. Back to December. I'm surprised we didn't have a Back to December song. Okay, you have a look on your face. That might be a bonus episode. Or what would you put in for Dear John? What is your story? Help us figure that one out.
Yeah.
Flush it out a little bit more for us. And then, of course, your verses for your relationship with God and what you think this era is. And yeah, those will be up either on Sunday or Wednesday.
we're figuring out our sort of content schedule with this new rotation, which we appreciate your patience with that. It's been really helpful for both of us to have some space around when we prep an episode and getting the content together afterwards. So and like this every other week thing.
Yes. And plus that also gives you opportunities to possibly have bonus episodes like the Tortured Poets Department, which I hope you've all listened to and went down that fangirl rabbit hole with us.
Right. And maybe some other content that we've inadvertently filmed.
Yes.
But we want to thank you always for joining us on this crazy, wacky, bizarre journey that we're on. We're having a great time, and we hope you're having fun with us as we think about the eras of God.
Yeah, and maybe some motivation to answer that Sunday question. I'm going to say this, and Paige doesn't know I'm going to say it. If you leave us a comment between now and, before Red comes out, because that'll give us time, we have some stickers now that we have created that we would love to give to whoever leaves a comment for or shares and reviews us.
Yeah, that would be awesome. We love people. We love the reviews. They help us make better content. They help us know what you like and what you don't like. And so please comment, leave a review, share this with other people, subscribe. You can find us anywhere you find podcasts on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as Pastor Swifties and pastorswifties.com.
Yes.
So we have our Swift Psalm, and I'll admit the last two were easy. This one was a little harder.
I may have looked at you and go, so you got our Psalm for us?
Right. Because the one that I didn't want to end on Better Than Revenge. And you all know why. You heard how, we were. So instead, we're going to go to one of both of our favorites on the album, which is Long Live.
Yes.
So we're going to hear parts of Long Live along with Psalm 66.
Yes. I said, remember this moment in the back of my mind, the time we stood with our shaking hands. The crowds and stands went wild. We were the kings and the queens, and they read off our names. The night you danced like you knew our lives would never be the same. You held your head like a hero on a history book page. It was the end of a decade, but the start of an age.
Make a joyful noise to God, all the earth. Sing the glory of God's name. Give to God glorious praise. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds. Because of your great power, your enemies cringe before you. All the earth worships you. They sing praises to you. Sing praises to your name. Come and see what God has done. He is awesome in his deeds among mortals. God turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the river on foot. There we rejoiced in God, who rules by their might forever, whose eyes keep watch on the nations. Let the rebellious not exalt themselves.
Long live the walls we crashed through. How the kingdom lights shine just for me and you. I was screaming, long live all the magic we made, and bring on all the pretenders. I'm not afraid. Long live all the mountains we moved. I had the time of my life fighting dragons with you. I was screaming, long live that look on your face, and bring on all the pretenders. One day will be remembered.
May you remember God's love for you and the joy that God can bring in your life through all kinds of things as you have a wonderful week. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.